They say desperation makes you do stupid things. I used to scoff at that. I considered myself a rational man, logical. But then came the eviction notice, the dwindling bank account, and the crushing weight of a city that felt determined to chew me up and spit me out. My name is Arthur Hayes, or at least it was. What I am now, well, that's another story. Or perhaps it's the end of this one. It all started 3 months ago. 3 months that feel like 3 lifetimes. I was working a dead-end data entry job, the kind that sucks the soul out through your fingertips, one keystroke at a time. My tiny studio apartment, a shoebox that cost more than a mortgage in saner parts of the country, was being converted into luxury condos, or so the eviction letter claimed. I had 30 days. Apartment 4B was on the top floor. No elevator, of course. The stairs groaned under my weight, each step a complaint from the ancient structure. The air grew colder, stiller with each flight. And then I saw it, or rather them. Not eyes, not a face. Fingers. Long, pale, impossibly thin fingers, stained with what looked like dark soil, pressed flat against the other side of the door, right at the bottom, as if something were lying prone, listening. They were utterly still, the nails yellowed and too long like talons. There were too many joints, bending at unnatural angles. I recoiled, scrambling backwards, a silent scream trapped in my throat. The poker clattered uselessly from my numb hand. Those weren't human fingers. The proportions were wrong, the stillness predatory. The thing on the other side of the door knew. It had to know I was there, looking. It was waiting. And as I stared, paralyzed, one of those long, pale fingers twitched, just once, a deliberate, almost beckoning movement. That broke the spell. I turned and fled. I didn't grab my coat, my wallet, my phone. I just ran. Out of the apartment, slamming the door behind me, though I knew it wouldn't stop what was on the other side. I clattered down the stairs, my lungs burning, expecting at any moment to feel those cold, many-jointed fingers close around my ankle. I burst out onto Hemlock Lane, into the indifferent afternoon sun, gasping for air like a drowning man. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out, until I collapsed on a park bench miles away, shaking and sobbing. A man was waiting by the door of 4B, Mr. Blackwood, I presumed. He was tall, unnaturally thin, dressed in an old-fashioned dark suit that seemed to absorb the little light in the hallway. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes pale, like faded photographs. He didn't smile. He simply nodded, his gaze unsettlingly direct. I never went back. I couldn't. The thought of that apartment, of that door, of those fingers, it still makes my skin crawl. I lost my deposit, my belongings, everything. I slept in shelters for a while, then on friends' couches, until I scraped together enough to leave the city altogether. I tried to report it. I called the police from a payphone, babbling about a strange landlord and a terrifying tenant. They asked if I was on drugs. They said they'd send a car if I gave them an address to check my welfare. I hung up. Who would believe me? One rule: never acknowledge the other tenant. It sounded like a prank or the ramblings of a lunatic. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I think I hear it, that faint, tuneless humming, or a soft scratching at the door. I tell myself it's my imagination, a trauma response, but I always leave a light on in the hallway. There are doors that are best left unopened. There are silences that are best left unbroken. And there are some tenants that you should never, ever acknowledge, because some things once seen can never be unseen, and they always know when you're looking. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice a dry rustle, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "You're punctual." He gestured me inside, and I have to admit my cynicism wavered. The apartment was surprisingly nice. Large rooms, high ceilings, hardwood floors that gleamed faintly even in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. There was a fireplace in the living room, intricate crown molding. It was old, yes, but it had character, and it was vast compared to my previous shoebox. The kitchen was dated but functional. The bedroom could fit more than just a bed and a sigh. "It's much larger than I expected," I managed, trying to keep the disbelief from my voice. Mr. Blackwood watched me, his expression unreadable. "The building has good bones, and it is, as advertised, quiet." "The rent is correct?" I asked, bracing myself for the catch. "It is. And utilities are included." He nodded again, a slow, deliberate movement. 30 days to find a new place in a city where finding an affordable apartment is akin to discovering a new element on the periodic table. I scoured online listings until my eyes burned. Cozy meant a broom closet with a hot plate. Rustic charm translated to crumbling plaster and a symphony of vermin. Hope was a dwindling resource. Every viewing was a parade of disappointment, a fresh wave of despair. My savings were thin, my patience thinner. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing slightly. There was a second door in the main hallway, smaller than the others, painted the same muted cream. "What's in there?" I asked, gesturing towards it. "Storage." Mr. Blackwood's gaze flickered to the door, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression. It wasn't emotion exactly, more like a careful blankness. "That is the access to the other tenants' quarters." "Oh," I said, surprised. "So it's a shared apartment." That wasn't in the ad. My heart sank. Another bait and switch. "No," Mr. Blackwood corrected, his voice flat. "You will have this entire space. Your kitchen, your bathroom, your living area, your bedroom." He gestured vaguely. "The other tenant has their own facilities, self-contained. You will likely never intersect." "Likely," I pressed. Quiet was one thing, but an unseen, unknown roommate was another. Mr. Blackwood fixed me with those pale eyes. "There is one rule, Mr. Hayes, one very important, non-negotiable rule, should you choose to take the apartment." I waited. Here it comes, I thought, the deal breaker. "You must never," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, each word precise, "never, under any circumstances, acknowledge the other tenant. Do not speak to them. Do not look at them should you ever happen to see them. Do not leave them notes. Do not knock on their door. Do not react to any sounds you may hear from their side. You are to behave as if they do not exist. As if that door," he nodded towards the small, cream-colored door, "is merely a wall. Can you do that, Mr. Hayes?" I stared at him. It was bizarre, utterly, confoundingly bizarre. What if there's an emergency, a fire? "The building has its own ways of handling emergencies," he said, dismissing my concern with a wave of his thin hand. "The rule is absolute, for your comfort and for theirs." And then I saw it, an ad on some obscure local forum, almost buried beneath spam posts for miracle cures and get-rich-quick schemes. It was an anomaly. Spacious one-bedroom, utilities included, exceptionally quiet building. Hemlock Lane, below market rate. Inquire with Mr. Blackwood. There wasn't even a phone number, just an email address that looked like it was generated by a cat walking across a keyboard. My mind raced. It was weird, deeply weird, but the apartment was perfect otherwise. The rent was a miracle, and how hard could it be to ignore someone? I was good at ignoring people. My last job had trained me well. Maybe they were a recluse, agoraphobic, or just intensely private. Maybe Mr. Blackwood was just an eccentric landlord with an eccentric tenant. "So I just pretend no one's there," I clarified. "Precisely," Mr. Blackwood said, a ghost of something that might have been satisfaction flickering in his eyes. "Consider that space empty, a forgotten room." Desperation, as I said, makes you do stupid things. I needed a place. This place was available. It was cheap. It was huge. The rule was strange but manageable, surely. "I can do that," I said. A thin smile, like a crack in ancient parchment, touched Mr. Blackwood's lips. "Excellent. The lease is simple. Month to month. First month's rent and a small security deposit are all that's required." I signed the papers, handed over the cash. He didn't take cards, of course, and he gave me a set of heavy, old-fashioned keys. "Welcome to Hemlock Lane, Mr. Hayes," he said, as he let himself out, the door sighing shut behind him, the locks clicking into place with an air of finality. And just like that, I was alone in my new, spacious, quiet apartment. The first few days were an adjustment. The quiet was the most noticeable thing. After years of city noise, of neighbors' lives bleeding through the walls, the silence here was profound. It was almost unnerving at first. I'd find myself listening for something, anything, a footstep from above, a voice from next door. But there was nothing, only the occasional groan of the old building settling, the sigh of wind around the eaves. Hemlock Lane, I knew it, an older part of town, full of Victorian houses that had seen better days, their grandeur slowly surrendering to time and neglect. It wasn't trendy, but it was central enough. Exceptionally quiet, it said. After my last place, with paper-thin walls that broadcasted every argument, every late-night TV show, every intimate moment from my neighbors, quiet sounded like paradise. And of course there was the door, the small, cream-colored door in the hallway. It became a focal point, despite my best efforts to ignore it. It was utterly unremarkable, yet it loomed large in my consciousness. I found my eyes drifting to it whenever I walked past. I'd pause, straining my ears. Nothing. I told myself it was just a storage closet Mr. Blackwood didn't want me accessing. Or perhaps the other tenant was a rarely there academic, or someone who worked night shifts and slept all day. Rational explanations. I clung to them. The first week passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. I bought a cheap rug to cover the scuffed part of the living room floor, a second-hand armchair that smelled faintly of old books and pipe tobacco. I tried to make the place feel like mine, but there was always that door, that silent, implicit presence on the other side. The first incident, if you can even call it that, was subtle. So subtle, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. I was in the kitchen making tea. It was late, the city outside a distant hum, and I heard it, a soft thump, like a book falling flat on a carpeted floor. It seemed to come from the direction of that door. I froze, kettle in hand. My heart rate ticked up a notch. I listened. Silence, just the hum of the old refrigerator. I waited for a full minute, ears straining. Nothing. It was probably the pipes, I told myself. Old building, strange noises. I poured my tea, my hand shaking just a little. I would not acknowledge it. That was the rule. A few nights later, it was a different sound. I was reading in bed, the only light from my bedside lamp, and I heard humming, a very faint, almost inaudible, tuneless humming. It was low, like a man's voice, but devoid of any melody. It seemed to emanate from the wall my bed was against, the wall that separated my bedroom from whatever lay beyond that other door. I held my breath. The humming continued for perhaps 30 seconds, then stopped as abruptly as it had begun. My skin prickled. This wasn't the pipes. This was something else, but I remembered the rule, do not react. I forced myself to turn the page of my book, though the words swam before my eyes. I did not get out of bed. I did not press my ear to the wall. I acknowledged nothing. Sleep was harder to come by after that. The silence of the apartment was no longer peaceful. It felt charged, expectant. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind made me jump. I started leaving a light on in the hallway. Then came the smells, faint, transient. One evening, as I walked past the door, I caught a whiff of something sweet and cloying like overripe flowers. It vanished almost immediately. Another time, it was a sharp, metallic scent like rust, or no, I wouldn't let my mind go there. Against my better judgment, fueled by caffeine and the dregs of desperation, I sent an email. I didn't expect a reply. Most too good to be true ads were just that. These incidents were infrequent, always subtle, always deniable. A sane person would dismiss them. A sane person would attribute them to an old building, an active imagination. I desperately wanted to be a sane person, but the rule, Mr. Blackwood's strange, insistent rule, hung over everything. It transformed every tiny, ambiguous event into something potentially sinister. Why such a strict rule if there was nothing to acknowledge? My work started to suffer. I made mistakes in my data entry, my concentration shot. My boss, a perpetually annoyed man named Henderson, commented on my haggard appearance. Rough nights, Hayes, he'd asked, not unkindly. I just mumbled something about a new apartment and noisy neighbors, a lie, of course. The irony wasn't lost on me. I began to develop little rituals. I'd walk past the door quickly, eyes averted. I'd play music softly to fill the silence, to drown out any potential sounds. I avoided being in the hallway near it as much as possible, but it was always there, a silent challenge. One Saturday, I decided to deep clean the apartment. Maybe, I thought, if I made the space truly mine, I could banish the unease. As I was vacuuming the hallway, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A tiny, almost invisible gap under that door. The old floorboards must have settled unevenly. My heart hammered. The urge to get down on my hands and knees, to peer through that sliver of darkness, was overwhelming. It was a physical ache, a desperate curiosity. Do not acknowledge. The words echoed in my mind, Mr. Blackwood's dry voice. I stood there for a long moment, vacuum cleaner hose dangling from my hand, warring with myself. Then, with a strength I didn't know I possessed, I turned away. I finished vacuuming, my movements stiff, my mind racing. That night the activity, if I can call it that, changed. It was no longer just faint sounds or smells. I was in the living room, trying to watch a movie, though my attention was mostly on the sounds of the apartment. Suddenly, from the hallway, came a distinct scratching sound. It wasn't faint, it wasn't ambiguous. It sounded like fingernails dragging slowly across wood, and it was coming directly from the door. It went on for about a minute, rhythmic, deliberate. Then silence. I sat frozen, my blood like ice water in my veins. My carefully constructed denial was crumbling. That was not the pipes. That was not the wind. That was something or someone on the other side of that door, making a sound they had to know I would hear. And I knew with a chilling certainty that it knew I was there. But a reply came within the hour, terse: viewing tomorrow, 3 p.m., apartment 4B, Hemlock Lane, come alone. The rule, the goddamn rule, do not react. But how could I not? My every instinct screamed at me to investigate, to shout, to call the police, to call Mr. Blackwood, though the thought of speaking to that man again filled me with a different kind of dread. I did nothing. I sat there rigid until the first gray light of dawn seeped through the grimy windows. I didn't sleep a wink. The scratching didn't return, but the silence that followed was somehow worse, filled with an unspoken, unacknowledged tension. The next week was a blur of heightened anxiety. I jumped at every creak. I found myself talking to myself, muttering reassurances that no one could hear. I considered breaking the lease, but the thought of apartment hunting again, of explaining my departure, and a darker, more insidious thought: what if I couldn't leave? What if the rule wasn't just about comfort, but about containment? I started to feel watched constantly. Even in my own bedroom, I'd feel a prickling on my skin, the hair on my arms standing on end, as if unseen eyes were boring into my back. I'd whirl around, finding nothing, just the oppressive silence and the unyielding presence of that other, unseen space. One evening I came home from work, exhausted and on edge. As I fumbled with my keys, I noticed the mat outside my apartment door was askew, just slightly. I always left it perfectly straight. Paranoia, I told myself, just paranoia. I stepped inside and the air was cold, colder than usual, and there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, damp earth, like a freshly dug grave. And then I saw it. On the polished hardwood floor of the hallway, leading from that door, stopping a few feet away, were marks. Not footprints exactly, more like shallow parallel grooves, as if something heavy, something with multiple points of contact, had been dragged. They were faint, visible only because the setting sun cast long shadows across the floor, and they were damp. My breath hitched. This wasn't subtle. This wasn't deniable. This was physical evidence. Something had come out of that room, something that left trails. The rule, do not acknowledge. My mind screamed it at me, but my body was already moving. I found myself drifting closer to the marks, my feet moving as if independent of my will. I crouched down, my fingers hovering over the strange grooves. They were definitely damp, and the smell of earth was stronger here. I looked at the door. It was closed, silent, innocuous. But it wasn't innocuous. It was a gateway. No request for references, no credit check mentioned, just an instruction: come alone. A tiny alarm bell, tinny and distant, chimed in the back of my mind, but the louder clang of my impending homelessness drowned it out. My sanity felt like it was fraying at the edges. I had to know, or I had to get out. I thought about Mr. Blackwood. I still had his email. Should I contact him, tell him the rule was impossible to keep? But what would he do? His calm, unsettling demeanor suggested he was perfectly aware of what went on in his building. Maybe he was part of it. That night I barricaded my bedroom door with a chair. A flimsy defense, I knew, but it offered a sliver of psychological comfort. Sleep was a distant memory. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening. The whispering started around 3 a.m. It was so faint, at first I thought it was the wind or the blood rushing in my ears, but it grew ever so slightly. Sibilant, genderless, seeming to come from all directions, yet nowhere specific. It wasn't words I could understand, more like the idea of words, a rustling, insidious murmur just beyond the threshold of comprehension. It seemed to be coiling around me in the darkness, tightening its grip. And then a single, clear tap on my bedroom door. I shot upright in bed, my heart exploding in my chest. The chair, it was still there, wedged under the handle, but the tap, it was so clear, so deliberate. Silence, the whispering had stopped. Another tap, firmer this time. Do not acknowledge. The rule was a burning brand in my mind, but this was direct. This was an attempt at interaction. I stayed silent, frozen, barely breathing. My eyes were fixed on the door, on the chair wedged beneath the handle. The next day I stood before the building on Hemlock Lane. It was imposing, a dark brick monolith from another era, with ornate carvings around the windows that looked like leering faces in the fading afternoon light. Ivy crawled up one side like skeletal fingers. It wasn't dilapidated, not exactly, but it had an air of finality about it, like a place people went into but didn't often leave. Then a sound that chilled me to the core. a soft, dry chuckle seeming to come from just outside my bedroom door. It wasn't Mr. Blackwood's voice. It was something else, something ancient and amused. And then the doorknob began to turn, slowly. I saw the brass knob rotate, millimeter by millimeter. The chair wedged underneath groaned, wood scraping against wood. It was trying to get in, the other tenant. I scrambled off the bed, backing away until I hit the far wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I couldn't scream. My throat was locked. The knob stopped turning. For a horrifying moment, I thought the door would splinter. But then, silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a faint shuffling sound, receding down the hallway. I didn't sleep. I stayed pressed against that wall until dawn, watching the door, every nerve screaming. As the first light hit my window, I knew I couldn't stay there another night. The rule was impossible. This wasn't just about ignoring strange noises anymore. This thing, whatever it was actively trying to engage, and it was terrifying. I had to get out. But first, a reckless, insane thought took root in my sleep-deprived, fear-addled mind. I had to see. I had to know what it was. The rule be damned. My sanity was already in tatters. What more could I lose? Perhaps if I saw it, understood it, I could fight it or escape it. Or maybe I was just being a fool, a moth drawn to a flame that had already singed its wings. I waited until midday when the sun was at its highest, pathetic as its light was through those grimy windows. I needed every ounce of courage, every sliver of perceived safety. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the heavy iron poker I'd taken from the fireplace, a useless weapon against the unknown, but it was something. The lobby was dim, smelling of dust, old wood, and something else, something faintly metallic like old pennies or old blood. No, Arthur, I told myself, don't let your imagination run wild. There was no one at the small, unattended reception desk, just a silence that felt heavy, absorbent. I approached the door, the small, cream-colored door. It looked no different, innocent, deceptive. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. I could hear Mr. Blackwood's voice in my head. Never acknowledge, behave as if it does not exist. To hell with the rule, I thought, a surge of desperate bravado coursing through me. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers brushing the cool, smooth paint of the door. There was no knob on this side, no keyhole. How did it open? Or was it meant to be opened only from the other side? I pressed my ear against it. Silence. No humming, no scratching, no whispering, just a dead, flat silence. Then I pushed, gently at first. The door didn't budge. I pushed harder. It remained firm, as if it were part of the wall itself. Frustration and fear warred within me. Was this it? Was my grand act of rebellion to be thwarted by a stubbornly closed door? And then I remembered the gap, the tiny gap at the bottom. Poker still in hand, I got down on my hands and knees. The floorboards were cold against my skin. The smell of damp earth was stronger here, right by the threshold. I angled my head, trying to see through the sliver of darkness. At first, nothing, just impenetrable black. I shifted, trying to get a better angle, my eye pressed right against the dusty floor.